Good evening and welcome tonight to tonight's nature competition for the Cleveland Photographic Society. Before we get started, we do have a few announcements. I just want to make sure everyone's aware of some upcoming competitions. On February 5th, we have a black and white and pictorial competition, and the deadline for entries for that competition is January 27th. On February 12th, we have a bee competition, and the deadline for entry is February 3rd. And the bee competition is primarily for new members and people that are just starting out in photography or starting out in competing. So that's kind of what it's aimed at. And then on February 26th, we have a photojournalism night. The deadline for entry is the 24th of February. That's not truly a competition. And for that, we want to remind you that when you submit a picture for that, we want you to do a brief 3 or 4 sentence write-up about the picture, and then those will be read the night of the photojournalism event. Normally, we would have you display your photos and talk about them, but obviously, since we're doing this virtually, we need your comments written up. So we ask you to try and do about 3 or 4 sentences. Don't be too short, and certainly don't be too long either. We do have an upcoming speaker here at the end of the month on the 29th. Again, it's a members-only Zoom session with Irene Hinkie-Sacalato, and her topic is A Passion for Wildlife Photography. There will be an email coming out with the link for that Zoom session, so you should be kind of watching for that. Let me remind you, if you have unsubscribed from the newsletter, the weekly snapshot, you've been taken off the mailing list and you won't get this Zoom session thing. So if you are unsubscribed, please resubscribe, otherwise you will miss things like that. And again, those are our announcements. We invite you to watch this and all Friday evening meetings at your convenience on the CPS YouTube channel. I will say that the Zoom sessions, when we have outside speakers, are limited to members only, and we do not put them out on YouTube. If it's a member that's giving the talk, generally those meetings will be put out on YouTube. For the Zoom sessions, we will have some encore presentations down the road, and we will send out the Zoom link, or the link for those in the future. The link for the YouTube channel is on the CPS website homepage, or if you open YouTube, do a search for Cleve Photographic, and you will find our YouTube videos that are posted there. We invite you to subscribe to our channel and choose to be notified whenever a new video is posted. So again, welcome. This is our third nature competition for the 2020-2021 year. Tonight we have 107 images, 62 in the nature category, and 45 in pictorial. And we'd like you to introduce our judges for the evening. These judges are not here locally, but their comments will be read by some members of the club. But the judges are Tom Croce. Tom was originally from the Cleveland area. He runs a fine art photography business in southwestern Ohio. He has a BED degree from Miami University of Fine Art in 1984. He has a Master of Architecture degree from Washington University in St. Louis in 1987. A freelance photographer with more than 30 years experience. He has work published by National Geographic, Landscape Photography Magazine, and NANPA Expressions 2016, a publication of the North American Nature Photography Association Top 250 Images. Ed MacKerrow is a full-time nature photographer whose images have been published internationally, including several magazine covers. He has a PhD in optics and has published multiple research papers on light. He's an active proponent for wildlife and ethical photography. He served as vice president of the board of directors for the Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge. He's an advisor to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for nature photography. He's published research on raptors and conducts official scientific surveys of wildlife, and his work is sold in galleries in Taos, Santa Fe, and Albuquerque. And our final judge is Krista McCuish. She's a nature photographer based in coastal Nova Scotia, Atlantic Canada, a critical care nurse and a geologist by profession, and when time allows, she explores in the wilderness. She's inspired by nature's details and the natural processes at work. Always curious, she attempts to bridge her creative side with her science background to express more about her place in the world. Has been published in On Landscape magazine, Bowden magazine, and Lensworks' Our Magnificent Planet. Her work has been exhibited in several solo and group shows at Viewpoint Gallery and Studio Lab Gallery in Nova Scotia. So those are our three judges for this evening. Judging criteria for those new to competitions: each judge will score an image on a scale of 5 to 9. The final score for each image is the total of all three judges' scores, and images are judged on 3 criteria: impact, composition, and technique. We're going to start tonight with nature images, but before we do that, we're going to have a word from Bill Keaton, who's the chair of the competition committee. Bill?
I just wanted to do a brief message about nature competitions. It's one of the more strict competitions because we do have a rule of no hand of man allowed in our photographs. On this competition, I probably had to disqualify 5 or 6 images that broke that rule, and I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of that. There was a bird on a limb with a sawed limb in front of it, a beautiful water scene with a stone wall that was obviously man-made, a scene from out west with a road winding through part of it. I bring these up just to tell you to take a close look at your nature images. Make sure that there is nothing man-made or nothing that shows that man has been there in your images. Otherwise, I do have to disqualify them and move them to the pictorial category. So just take a final look at your images before you hit the upload button next time.
Okay, and for our readers tonight, reading for Krista is Barb Cerrito. Reading for Tom Croce is Lauri Culp, and reading for Ed McCarron is Bill Keaton. So if you hear familiar voices, that's why you're hearing them. So we'll start with our nature images. We will get comments on all of the nature images. For pictorial, we will only comment on those where comments were requested. So let's begin with the nature images.
Krista says, I quite like the overall mood of this photograph. It has a bright, colorful, and lively dynamic for autumn. The strong diagonal mid-ground rocks are an added strength and guide the eye upwards through the vertical dimension of the trees. I wonder if cropping closer to the bottom of the rock wall formation and deleting the immediate foreground might make it a stronger image, compact with more impact.
The image is entitled Autumn in the Woods by Robert Boyle, 18 points.
Tom says, very sharp image. It's well exposed and very nice separation of the subject from the background. I would place the subject in the upper portion of the frame and crop off at least a half or 2/3 of the stem, leaving more space at the bottom of the frame. The image feels bottom heavy to me. Moving the subject up would help balance the composition, and the additional space at the bottom would enhance the feeling of the plant hanging.
The image is called Banana Flower by Jane Sidney, 21 points.
Ed says, I love the composition of this photo with the quarter of a sphere with the bee crawling over it. Macro photography is very hard with moving subjects. Unfortunately, the narrow depth of field with the field blur of the foreground degrades this photo. On the other hand, this is a difficult situation to photograph and get right with the depth of field. You did a great job trying.
The image is called Bee Feeling Blue by Ron Werman, 22 points.
I enjoyed the placement of the goose mid-center. Bravo for ignoring the rule of thirds. The depth of field works well with the bird being sharp and standing out in front of the background. The arching branch and contrasting color adds to the overall composition. I might have removed a few distracting elements in the foreground in processing. The small branch on the right and immediately in front of the goose. If you could have positioned yourself to avoid the dark tree in the background, it would be a stronger image, I think. But not sure if this was a possibility.
The image is entitled Black Swan Resting by James Kennedy, 21 points.
Tom says, I really like the perspective on this one. It really put you eye to eye with the bee. Unfortunately, the bee looks soft. The eyes and the head do not appear to be sharp focus. And I think I would like to see much more of the bee in focus, especially the pollen sacs. I would also like to see the bee located somewhere other than the center of the frame, maybe the lower right. I think that would make it more dynamic and create more of a sense of the bee climbing around the flower by giving it room to move into the image.
The image is called Bumblebee by Gary Marich, 20 points.
An interesting artistic photograph, Ed says. I love the contrast of the flower petals along the larger radii of the composition. The center of the photo is distracting as it is not properly exposed. The highlights seem to be blown out. Instead of drawing my eye into the center, it stops due to the color difference in the blown out highlights. Perhaps this was planned? I suggest re-editing this exact photo and lowering the highlights so the edges of the petals in the center are crisper. Overall, this creative photo shows a unique and promising approach that with just a bit of editing will be a high quality photo. You might also consider a black and white version of this.
The image is called China Aster by Joseph Mikko, 20 points.
Krista says, a wonderful moment to witness for sure. The image is bright and eye-catching and captures a memorable moment in time, complete with water droplets. Often these are the hardest moments to record and require a fast shutter speed and adequate depth of field to attain sharpness to the bird's eye. I feel the image could be sharper either by adjustments to shutter speed, ISO, and aperture, and or focus technique.
The image is called Cormorant by Mike Lonsdale, 19 points.
Tom says, this is a nice buck. He is in focus and well exposed, which is not easy to do with a dark animal with white areas. My comments really are how you chose to frame the image. I would have tried to frame it with the buck more to the right of the frame, his head more toward the center. This would leave more room on the left side of the frame. Leaving more space in front of the animal helps give a sense of movement. I would also have preferred a shot with the eyes open. The eyes really help instill life in the animal.
The image is entitled Dreaming About a Doe by Tom Wagner, 17 points.
Ed says a sharp focus on the second duck. The composition is interesting since it incorporates the duck with water ripples. The other ducks, since they experience field blur due to not enough depth of field, distract my eye. This situation, likely taken with a long lens and subjects fairly close, is difficult to get all the ducks in better focus. The weeds also distract. The good news is the quality of focus and exposure on the second duck shows the photographer knows how to nail the focus well. I am willing to bet the photographer has some images where only one duck is in the composition, making it more viable for competition photo. The color balance seems to be a bit yellow, likely due to the turbidity of the water reflecting warm light.
The image is called Ducks by Wayne Fierstein, 18 points.
Krista says, superb and majestic image and well composed. The detail is fantastic and sharp for the eagle's eye, beak, and feathers. A small detail. There is a round black mark on top of the eagle's head. It looks like a clone tool in processing, or part of the background. This could be easily fixed for further impact.
The image is entitled Eagle Always on Duty by Fran Marino, 25 points, second place.
Tom says, beautiful. The bee against the yellow really provides separation with the background, making it very clear that the bee is in flight. I might just crop a little, maybe about a halfway between the edge of the frame and the stem off the left of the image. Maybe a little more depth of field. The bee looks a little soft, but overall, very nice job.
The image is called Eye on the Prize by Vicky Wirt, 23 points, honorable mention.
Wonderful depth of field on a flower against a beautifully dark, mysterious background, Ed says. The stems on the lower part of the flower that reach outside the field of view make this composition a bit awkward. Perhaps another image is composed so they are not clipped. Overall, this photograph shows a lot of talent in understanding depth of field.
The image is called Garden View Beauty by Robert Boyle, 19 points.
Krista says, an interesting subject with a moody, pleasant, soft lighting and choice of focus. It feels comforting and relaxing to the eye. The composition might be stronger or more original with a different angle of view, as opposed to straight on and centered.
The image is entitled Glow by Jane Sidney, 19 points.
Tom says, cool shot of this great blue heron. It looks very sharp, and I like the fact that it is doing something that really creates a strong narrative. My two main issues with this image are the background and the light. It appears that this was shot in the middle of the day when the light has the effect of washing out the color to the point where it almost looks overexposed. The bright trees and stump in the background also really hurt this image by taking your attention away from the bird. Moving a few feet to the left so the tree is either out of the frame or at least not behind its head would help.
The image is entitled Got a Little Itch by David Burns, 18 points.
Ed says, I love the composition with the vertical orientation of the bobcat aligned with the trees. I also love the contrast of the sunny bobcat and trees with a nice dark background. The exposure on the cat looks good, and I like that the curvature of the trees retains the natural shadows and lighting. I wonder how the photo would look if there was a bit more contrast on the cat's face. Perhaps the shadow sides of the trees and bobcat would be a bit darker. Overall, a great image. A friendly reminder about truth in captioning. If you publish this, make sure to indicate if the cat was wild or captive.
The image is called Hang In There by Glenn Patranek, 25 points, second place.
Krista says, huddled sunbathing at its best. You've captured turtles in their element and made a strong documentary image. The turtles stand out from the background with pleasing focus, and the composition and exposure are good for strong lighting conditions.
Oops, hang on a second. Oh, there it is. The image is entitled Hang On Guys by David Burns, 19 points.
Tom says, this is a nice image. Exposing white birds are always a challenge. I do have a couple suggestions that might help improve it. Give them a try and see what you think. My first thought is that I want to get in closer, so I would try cropping in tighter on the three birds at the end of the branch. I think that would be a more dramatic image, and you really don't lose anything by eliminating the bird on the right, and you would also have an odd number of birds. I am also curious what this would look like as a high-key image.
The image is entitled Hanging Around by Bill Keaton, 23 points, honorable mention.
Ed says, nice detail on the red-tailed hawk's feathers. Pretty good catchlight on the eye. The downy, loose white feather on the hawk's right leg is distracting. I wonder what the story is there. Wind? The colors of this image are both great and also a bit distracting. If the background blur was more so that I do not see as much detail in the background and still see the color, that would be ideal. Great exposure and color contrast, sharp in the places it needs to be, composed so the hawk is looking down along the tree branch. Intriguing, what is the hawk looking at? You could blur the background in post-processing if desired.
The image is called Hawk Looking for Food by Jackie Sieski, 19 points.
Krista says, an interesting and colorful subject to observe. It looks like you caught the grasshopper about to just take off or land on the stem. I might have tried to get the eye and side of the face in better focus just by using macro technique and patience. The background elements tend to be a bit distracting.
The image is called Hopper by Mike Kopkas, 17 points.
Tom says, I like the idea of making the image of the light rays coming through the trees on a foggy morning. But the foreground is so contrasty that it took me a while to see what you were trying to do. A couple things I would try. Dodge the rays to help emphasize them some more, and try to tone down the contrast on the area of the foreground that extends from the lower left of the frame to the right, everything below the large slab of stone. I think it needs to be a little softer to keep the feel of the foggy morning.
The image is called Kendall Ledges, Cuyahoga Valley National Park by Dave Saborik, 22 points.
Ed says, lovely color contrasting at great exposure on the sky. You can see the detail in the whites of the clouds, which is good. I think the composition cropping could be a bit better. Notice the reflection of the white cloud in the foreground is clipped. Perhaps you have another version where the island is not perfectly centered in the frame. Which channel does my eye want to travel down? The exposure and depth of field are well done.
The image is called Lake Apopka, Florida by Susan Mahorsek, 22 points.
Krista says, I feel this composition works well enough in monochrome. You have enough contrast in the brighter leaves against a range of tonalities across the rest of the image, and it is well balanced. The water droplets add another interesting dimension.
The image is called Leaves by Eric Wethington, 25 points, second place.
Tom says, nice shot of this eagle on the nest. It looks nice and sharp with enough depth of field. These guys are difficult to expose for, especially in direct sunlight. Some of the white areas around its neck and tail are overexposed. I feel the way the tree on the left, I like the way the tree on the left frames the image, but I wish the background was cleaner. I would also like to see more of the nest at the bottom of the frame. It would help to clarify the narrative of the image.
The image is entitled Look at Me by Serena Cernick, 21 points.
This is a great image, Ed says. I love the detail on the back of the accipiter. It looks like stained glass. The eye is sharp, the shadows are great, the background blur is great. The hawk is looking into the frame, which is good. Although there is a lot going on with all the branches and needles, you did a great job of keeping my eye on the hawk's face.
The image is entitled Looking Back by Jackie Sieski, 23 points, honorable mention.
Krista says, I think this image is attempting to tell a story, and I get the sense these birds are being territorial, if that was the intent of the photograph. The composition could be stronger with position of the upper bird showing more interaction, and if the image was a little closer.
The image is called Lunchtime by James Kennedy, 19 points.
Tom says, beautiful color on the flower and separation from the background. Also, the water drops add some interest to the image. I would bring down the level of the leaves in the background to the upper right area of the image so it is closer to the overall background. I would also darken the partial leaf in the lower part of the image. I also can't help but think there is a different angle that might have worked a little better. I really would like to see what's going on behind it.
The image is called Magnolia by Sarah Zeitlow, 19 points.
Ed says this is an amazing image. It was my favorite of all the images I judged. Why? Simple, artistic, interesting. Technically, the image is well done. I love the gradient of the sun and the wisp of clouds. I love the distant mountains exposed perfectly. Not over-processed, well-composed, great foreground leading to the distant mountains.
The image is called Moroccan Desert Sunset by Richard Ader, 26 points, first place.
Krista says, a colorful and sharp image with good depth of field. I find these sorts of compositions work best when the butterfly or moth is in a side plane arrangement so that you can achieve maximum depth of field and can also get a pleasing composition that takes in all the detail of the moth parts and eyes in addition to patterns on the wings.
The image is entitled Moth by Mike Kopkas, 20 points.
Tom says, nice detail. The eyes are sharp and there is nice detail on the wings. A couple things I might suggest. Try and get a little lower so you are shooting at its eye level. It helps engage the view because it's a different perspective than we are used to looking at them. If you're going to shoot them from above, try and catch them with their wings open.
The image is called Moth in the Pink by Ron Werman, 22 points.
Ed says, I like the detail around the eyes of this owl. I always look at the reflection in the pupils on images like this. It is amazing what you see sometimes. In this image, I see the forest instead of a car or crowd of people. That is refreshing. The composition crop of this image turned me off a bit. Why so tight? Why not the tufts of the owl? What is up with the pine needles on the LHS? I am thinking that the photographer has a version of this image where the crop is not so tight. That would likely make for a better photo.
The image is called Owl Eyes by Nancy Kekalik, 22 points.
Krista says, colorful and nicely focused and stands out well against the background. I feel the composition isn't as strong as it could be, and time could be spent looking at different ways to position the camera in relation to the flower for more impactful composition. Also trying different focal lengths and moving closer to different parts of the flower.
The image is called Pink by Jim Rowe, 20 points.
Tom says, I like the sunburst, but the image lacks depth and feels too evenly light. There is plenty of depth of field, but I struggle to find the focal point of the image. Maybe getting low with a wide-angle lens would emphasize the canyon walls with their height and texture.
The image is called Slot Magic by Bob Kowaleski, 24 points, third place.
Ed says, this is an interesting composition. I like the exposure and tonal values. The depth of field, especially across a field of view, is distracting and not desirable. Too much blur on the edges. Are these from lens aberrations or are they intentional?
The image is called Succulent by Sarah Zeitlow, 20 points.
Krista says, nice and sharp and well composed in relation to the background with lots of good detail in the bird. I feel the wood that the bird stands on doesn't really add much to the photo and is a bit distracting, competing for the detail we see in the wings. It might work better if the wood parts at the bottom were closely cropped a bit more across the bottom of the edge.
The image is entitled Swainson Hawk by Glenn Patranek, 23 points, honorable mention.
Tom says, this is an interesting shot of the great blue heron. It's nicely exposed and is sharp. I might crop some off the bottom and left of the image to help to get the bird out of the center of the frame.
The image is called The Eyes Have It by Joe DiStefano, 22 points.
Amazing color, Ed says. I do like the leading line, bringing my eye into the mysterious darkness deep in the flower. The crop composition confuses me, though. I would love to see the entire flower. Was this crop made to avoid seeing field blur from depth of field challenges?
The image is called Tropical Hibiscus by Susan Bestel, 22 points.
Krista says, the golden glow on the water is a nice touch standing out against the log and grass background. There is a lot of extra room on both sides of the photo that doesn't necessarily add to the photo. I might crop closer for more impact and draw more attention to the turtles.
The image is called Turtles on a Log by Wayne Fierstein, 21 points.
Tom says, this is a beautiful sunset. I think the sun setting behind the cliff works very well. I might crop it to more of a panorama, cropping off the bottom to a little below the horizon and above the first wave. I might try a graduated neutral density filter on the sky to bring down the luminance and saturate the color.
The image is called Washington Sunset by Nancy Kekalik. 24 points, third place.
Ed says this is a lovely artistic composition. I like how each goose mirrors the other in terms of body position. I am torn on the nice detail, but not as sharp a focus as could be achieved on the front goose. Contested with the field blur of the distant geese. The reflection in front is great. The blur in the background distracts and confuses the image some.
The image is called Watchful Eye by Rick Carroll, 22 points.
Krista says, an excellent, well-composed, and interesting composition. The diagonal lines on the front leaf and the black back leaf are repeated, strengthening the image and leading the eye upward to the main subject, the insect. The insect itself is in a good position to have the patterns on the body in good focus. If you had the wing in focus too, it would have been even more outstanding.
The image is entitled Watching You by Vicki Wirt, 26 points, first place.
I really like the way the light emphasizes the velvet on the antlers, but the image feels a little unnatural to me. I think the light is too cool. The whites have a greenish blue tint. Maybe just adjusting the white balance to be slightly warmer might help.
The image is called What Was That by Gary Wood, 23 points, honorable mention.
Great composition, and I love the background bokeh, Ed says. The focus and or depth of field on the fungi is blurry compared to the lichen, just slightly. This challenging, macro-like, the photo would be improved next time using focus stacking since I think it was taken at close range.
The image is called Wild Mushroom by Maria Diaconou, 18 points.
Krista said, this composition had me asking more questions. I wanted to know about these birds and what they were doing. There are a few distracting elements in the bottom left corner and across the upper right. With positioning yourself and camera, it might have been nice to see all of the three beaks in the image and focused to complete the photo more and possibly rid of distracting elements.
The image is called Three Baby Green Herons by Serena Cernick, 17 points.
Tom says this image is nicely composed. The flowers well exposed with beautiful color and the bee is sharp. There are some blown highlights on the bee's wings. The sunflower is not out of focus enough or quite sharp enough. It's kind of in between. I think it needs to go one way or the other, either more out of focus or sharp.
The image is called Bee on Sunflower by Kathy Amari, 20 points.
Ed says great detail on the black bear's face, eyes, and body. The composition is perfect as the bear approaches behind a log. The color contrast is great. The only suggestion is that if the background was a bit more blurred, my attention would have stayed locked onto the bear more. It is now, and I do like seeing where the bear is coming from. However, this could be made more intriguing with a blurred background. Great photo.
The image is called Black Bear Looking for Lunch by Susan Bestel, 23 points, honorable mention.
Krista said, complementary colors are nice and stand out in a pleasing arrangement. The insect itself is well focused where it should be in the upper portion of the body. The green out of focus parts of the flower I find distracting, and I wonder if this might have been addressed with camera body positioning.
The image is called Cicada in Waiting by Darla Zajac, 20 points.
Tom says, very nice image of this beautiful bird. The exposure is dead on and it's tack sharp. I might try and crop a little off the right. Sometimes if you wait a bit, they will move their head just enough so you can get a little catch light in their eye, but overall, very nice.
The image is called Common Yellowthroat by Tom Wagner, 23 points, honorable mention.
Ed says, nice focus on the bird, nice catch light on its eye. Exposure looks good. The background has sensor noise on it that is noticeable. The background detail is distracting. Depending on the focal length, aperture, and distance to the subject, the bird could be fully in focus and the background artistically blurred with a faster lens, or not.
The image is called Eastern Phoebe by Ben Collins, 24 points, third place.
Krista says the elephant is well composed and I like how the composition isolates it from the background and draws attention to all the textures and patterns to the skin. The darkening in the bottom left is a bit problematic, so it might be closely cropped at the bottom and then processed out for a stronger image.
The image is called Elephant No Noses by Fran Marino, 21 points.
Tom says, I love the feel of this image and the story it tells, and I really like the way it's cropped. The heron looks to me to be a little overexposed, and there are blown highlights on its head, and I think I would back off the vignette a bit.
The image is called Foggy Cove Heron by Rick Carroll, 22 points.
Pretty good focus on the great blue heron, Ed says. I like how the full wingspan is in focus and the wingtips are not blurred for motion blur. Although the background is blurred, I find it hard to really concentrate on the eye, bill, and face of the heron. The exposure is great on the heron. Overall, a wonderful image where the heron stands out from the background in a good way.
The image is called Heron in Flight by Bill Keaton, 21 points.
Krista says there is a nice range of earth tones in this image. It feels warm and inviting and a place to sit a while. I'm unsure exactly what the subject is, but it does have me asking questions. The compositional elements are not as strong as they could be in the image, and I would pay attention a little more to visual design elements for impact.
The image is called Lone Tree by Rich Foley, 18 points.
Tom says, nice action shot of the osprey landing on the nest. It's well exposed and the composition is nice and it's tack sharp. I might try shooting it from farther away if possible. It would help change the angle so you are not looking up at such a steep angle. Since they land and take off into the wind, if you can keep the wind at your back.
The image is called Osprey Nest Building by Gary Wood, 22 points.
Very nice image, Ed says. I love the lighting and the translucent-like effect of the petals. My eye travels to the background in a comfortable and sensible way. Great composition where the leading line takes me from center left to upper right. Nice.
The image is called Peruvian Lily by Joseph Mikko, 23 points, honorable mention.
Krista says this is a superb example of a well-composed insect macro shot for documentary purposes. The placement of the grasshopper is fine in the frame, in the same orientation as the leaves, and they complement one another. Good exposure and focusing and depth of field.
The image is called Relaxing Grasshopper by Eric Wethington, 24 points, third place.
Tom says the interaction between the cranes is wonderful. The exposure is great. The birds are tack sharp. I think the decision to crop it as a pano was a good one. Just one nitpicky thing is the white blurry flower in the lower left corner. I might try to burn it in a bit.
The image is called Sandhill Crane Love Dance by Jim Rowe, 22 points.
Ed says this is an interesting and creative image. I like how the trail path leads my eye to the arch. The highlights of the sun are tricky here. The sunburst would be awesome if it was taken with the center of the sun behind the arch. It is almost there. I can relate to how hard it is to scramble a tripod to get this lined up.
The image is called Sandy Path by Bob Kowaleski, 23 points, honorable mention.
Krista says, colorful and pleasing arrangement of the lines with the tentacles going vertical and diagonal up through the frame. It looks like higher ISOs were used, making it a bit grainy, but that can't be helped with difficult lighting and movement and camera capability. The image appears to have blown highlights in the upper part of the jellyfish, so watching exposure in this lighting is key.
The image is called Stinging Jellyfish by Joe DiStefano, 19 points.
The exposure and the color are very nice. I think the photo might be in tighter, more of an abstract. My biggest issue is that I am concerned that to make this image, we might have interfered with the natural behavior of the bird on the nest. Some birds will abandon their nest if they feel it's not safe for them to return, or we may, by our presence, accidentally lead a predator to the nest.
The image is called Two Different Moms by Bonnie Luxo, 18 points.
Ed says there's amazing color and sky, very intense image. On images like this, staring into the sun, the natural dynamic range is wide. These situations call for exposure bracketing from at least 3 stops to plus 3 stops. In this challenging image, I suggest lowering the highlights as much as possible to retain detail in the blown out yellow part of the sky. The local contrast is too high. The crepuscular rays are too dark relative to the orange sky. With some careful post-processing, that includes lower the saturation, lower the color contrast, recover highlights if possible, this would be an awesome image. Noise reduction on the horizon would also help. Often, nature shows colors this intense. They can be real. Even so, it sometimes helps to desaturate and lower the contrast, soften the edges to make the photo more acceptable. This is frustrating as sometimes nature does show us lighting that is amazing.
The image is called Venice Sunset by Maria Diaconou, 15 points.
Krista says, a beautiful complementary color palette with hummingbird and flower. The hummingbird is beautifully positioned in the frame, as is the flower. The focus appears to be sharper with the flower than the hummingbird. It would have been nicer to see the opposite, although indeed quite challenging photographing hummingbirds. A very beautiful image nonetheless.
The image is called Which One Should I Choose by Donna Schneider, 20 points.
This is a very nice picture. It's beautifully exposed. It's tack sharp with great texture and detail. I think the flower to the right feels like it's floating compared to the one on the left. The 2 buds help anchor the flower on the left. I think I might have tried this with just the flower on the left or removed the buds and tried it with the 2 of them.
The image is called Zinnias by Dave Saborik, 24 points, 3rd place. And that ends the nature portion of the competition. We will begin our pictorial images, and with those we are going to run through the no comment images. I will read the title and the maker's name and the score, and then when we get to the comment images, we will pick up the comments from the judges. The first image, And Who Are You by Fran Marino, 21 points. Bearded Owl by Joseph Mikko, 24 points, 3rd place. Blackwater Falls by Donna Schneider, 24 points, 3rd place. Budapest at Night by Donna Schneider, 23 points, honorable mention. Eyes by Serena Cernick, 20 points. Falls by Rich Foley, 21 points. Gardenia by Gary Marich, 19 points. Gateway at Night by Cynthia Smith, 21 points. Great Blue Heron by Ben Collins, 19 points. Ice on Tree, Lake Erie by Dave Saborik, 19 points. Lake Erie Fury by Marge Brady, 21 points. Leopard in Repose by Ben Collins, 23 points, honorable mention. Lunch Interrupted by Susan Mahorsek, 20 points. Monastery Well by Maria Diacono, 19 points. Moonrise at the Grand Canyon by Bill Keaton, 22 points. Moroccan Backstreet by Richard Ader, 18 points. Moth Orchid by Cynthia Smith, 23 points, honorable mention. Pine Fireworks by Jim Rowe, 21 points. Pink Flowers and Bumblebee by Marge Brady, 21 points. Red Columbine by Mike Lonsdale, 20 points. School is Out by Dennis Wirt, 18 points. Three Leaves Ending by Rick Carroll, 25 points, second place. Tuscan Fields by Dennis Wirt, 24 points, third place. Wild Geraniums in Spring Rain by Gary Wood, 20 points. Winter at Last by Bob Kowaleski, 21 points. Winter Fence by Rich Foley, 17 points. Working the Aerial Hoop by Susan Bestel, 19 points. All right, the rest of the images we will comment on, so. This one is for Ed. Yeah.
Yeah, Ed says this is a nice composition of a very popular scene. You did a good job of exposing given what looks to be a flat, light sky. Having the gravel walkway is distracting in the composition, hard to avoid in this part. The sky is noisy. I cannot tell if there's some twilight pinks and blues there due to the grain. The exposure on the towers on the left seem to be brighter than the tower on the right. Is this real or post-processing issues? The LaSalle Mountains do not stand out as well against the twilight sky as they could. I think the grain noise is a main factor here.
The image is called Awe-Inspiring Utah by Cynthia Smith, 21 points.
Krista says, I like the palette of colors for this bird on a wire, both background and in the feathers. It is also nicely exposed, sharp with great detail, and positioned neatly in the frame. A nice, pleasing image, except for a small dust spot that could be cloned out in front of the bird.
The image is called California Quail by Mike Lonsdale, 22 points.
Tom says this is a nice covered bridge. The exposure on the bridge looks good, but the foreground area on the right is underexposed. I would try using the shadow slider in Lightroom to open up the shadows. I think the time of the day you choose to shoot this is working against you. Perhaps shooting this around dawn or dusk would have helped saturate the color in the trees and the foreground and perhaps some color in the sky. The composition is okay. If you shoot it with better light, you might find more options for your composition.
The image is called Covered Bridge by David Burns, 18 points.
Amazing, said Ed. It is like a flame, very powerful. The crop composition distracts me, though. Where is the rest of the flower?
The image is called Dahlia by Glenn Patranek, 23 points, honorable mention.
Krista says this has a lovely autumnal feel with emanating warmth and peace. The lighting is creatively presented and the arrangement pleasing to the eye. The processed brushstrokes were selectively used on parts of the image, and I'm not sure how much they add to the overall feel of the image.
The image is called Fall Arrangement by Nancy Kikelik, 26 points, first place.
Tom says, this is a cool subject and composition. It tells an engaging story. I don't know if it's in HDR, but it looks like one. The color looks very dull except for the greens and yellow, which appear to be oversaturated. Because of the tone map / HDR, it really lacks depth and is flat in terms of the tonal range. This image has a lot of potential. I would start by making sure your black point is set correctly and perhaps using the dehaze slider to help with the mid-tone contrast.
The image is entitled Farmer and Castle Donovan, Ireland by Wayne Fierstein, 20 points.
Ed says this is a captivating photo. I love how I am drawn towards the face of the statue and her wings are composed as a gateway to the bright color behind her. The opposing colors on the color wheel really work nicely here. I wish the hands were in focus along with the face. Focus stacking, maybe?
The image is entitled Hazarat Angel by Ron Werman, 23 points, honorable mention.
Krista says, this immediately made me think of The Sound of Music with its mountains, expansive fields, pastures, and alpine huts. The exposure and contrast is good for the lighting conditions. I find myself wanting to see a bit more of the white grasses in the foreground that are partly cropped out or cropped closer so they are not cut off. A nice, clean, scenic image.
The image is called Hiker's Paradise by Dennis Wirt, 22 points.
Tom says, the time of the day is working against you. The light is very flat. The question I have about this image is what is the story or the narrative you are trying to tell with this picture? Perhaps arriving early when the boat is heading out to fish or returning from fishing or some activity on the boat. Next time, I would ask yourself what's the story you want to tell. Another approach would have been to get much closer and focus in on some of the details of the boat. There's all kinds of cool details, lines, shapes, and patterns that could have made some nice abstract images.
The image is entitled Justin Dang, Bayou La Batre by Gary Marich, 17 points.
This is a great weather image, Ed says. It shows a double rainbow, supernumerary bows, anti-crepuscular rays, and lighting all in one image. I just wish it was over a wide open field or prairie grass instead of a neighborhood. I am sure the photographer feels the same. At least the neighbors' cars were not in the frame. Given the circumstances and location, this is an A+ image.
The image is entitled Lightning and Bows by Mike Kopkas, 22 points.
Krista says, a moody image that has a story to tell and filled with mystery. What is she doing and why? Also, a creative image and technically well presented with light, exposure, drama, and composition. An impactful image and asking questions of the viewer. Well done.
The image is called Losing Her Identity by Jackie Sieski, 25 points, second place.
Tom says, very cool image. The exposure looks dead on, as does the focus and depth of field. The only nitpick is that I would burn the small gray things that are sitting on the ground and around the edges. I think the composition works. Centering it, I think, was the right decision. I don't know if you shot any macro images of this, but that definitely would have been my next image.
The image is called Nature's Lace by Marge Brady, 25 points, second place.
Ed says, powerful artistic photograph. I love the reflections. They make me think about the scene and increase my curiosity, which is a good thing. The field blur is likely intentional and adds to the artistic aspect of this photo. Well done.
The image is entitled Petal by Sarah Zeitlow, 26 points, first place.
Krista says, a high contrast image with a bursting red color. It evokes exuberance in high intense lighting conditions. The positioning of the flower stem within the frame could be stronger in relation to the background.
The image is called Sparkling Coral Bells by Vicky Wirt, 21 points.
Tom says, again, the time of the day you chose to make this is not helping you. The flat light is really desaturating the color in the trees and on the pond. I might have tried framing it to eliminate the gravel on the right and a lot of, if not all, of the sky. I think the picture is in the lower 2/3 to half of the image. It might have been interesting to just shoot the reflections of the trees and the statue, which would have created a much more abstract image.
The image is called Springtime at the Art Museum by James Kennedy, 19 points.
Ed says, clever eye by the photographer to create this image. I like the patterns of the stairs juxtaposed with the angles of the slope. The photo is a bit busy, however. Given the snow depth or lack thereof, this was done as best as could be expected.
The image is called The Dam in Winter by Jane Sidney, 24 points, third place.
Krista says, an interesting treatment of color. The elements are organized neatly in the frame and well exposed and sharp with details. A nice clean image.
The image is called Tropical Paradise by Robert Boyle, 18 points.
Tom says, this is a very compelling image. Talk about creating a narrative. I might try to open the shadow a bit on her face. We glean so much of the feel of the image from the emotion expressed on the face that I would just like to see a bit more of her face.
The image is called Woman with Infant by Richard Ader, 23 points, honorable mention. And that concludes our competition for this evening. We'd like to thank all of our judges and those that were reading for the judges. We appreciate your time and effort. And we also want to thank all who have entered. We do appreciate feedback, so if you'd like to send us your feedback on the competition or whatever, you can contact us at info@clevelandphoto.org. And so this concludes tonight's event. For more information about competing or to join the Cleveland Photographic Society, please visit our website, clevelandphoto.org. And thank you, and have a good night. Stay safe, everyone.